Meseches Megillah Daf Daled. It comes at the end of a list of halachos said by Rabbi Shua ben Levi. The Gemara on this daf will continue the list with 4 additional halachos of Purim said by Rabbi Shua ben Levi. Then the Gemara will return to its discussion about the small villages that were allowed to read the Megillah a few days early. The Gemara will discuss why. The Gemara will have 2 options as to why. Then the Gemara will get into who our Mishnah is, which Tana is the author of our Mishnah based on how he understands what you do when Purim falls on a Friday. We'll see that there are 2 machlokes on the topic. The Gemara will say our Tana could be one of 2 in each machlokes. The end of the daf will conclude with the explanation of why we don't read the Megillah on Shabbos, which is indicated by our Mishnah. So let's begin. We have the halachos listed by Rabbi Shua ben Levi. So Rabbi Shua ben Levi says we were discussing that towns with a city, a town or a city which is walled from the days of Yeshua ben Nun, has a wall around it, had a wall around it, or has one going back to the time of Yeshua ben Nun, those read the Megillah on the 15th. They keep Purim on the 15th of the month of Adar. So Rabbi Shua ben Levi begins by saying that the towns of Lud, Ono, Gai, and Charashim are all in this classification. They all had a wall at the time of Yeshua ben Nun. Now these towns are mentioned in the Sefer Divrei Yamim. They are towns in the region of Binyamin, in Mate Binyamin, and they were constructed there, and they were all listed there. So the Gemara says Yeshua ben Levi had a Masorah that they all had a wall at the time of Yeshua ben Nun. So the Gemara asks right away that it's not possible, because in those psukim in Divrei Hayamim themselves it says that they were built by the Bnei El Pa'al. Their names were Aver, Misham, and Shomed, as the psukim there say, and it says Hu Bana es Oinei ve'eslaid uvnei seha. El Pa'al was the one who built these towns. He built Ono, Lud, and the suburbs, which are Gai and Charashim. So how could Rabbi Shua ben Levi say that these towns had a wall from the time of Yeshua ben Nun if they were built well after the times of Yeshua ben Nun? They were built in the times of El Pa'al. So the Gemara answers with another question. The Gemara says, you see elsewhere that these towns were built by Asa HaMelech, Asa, king of Yehuda. So obviously these towns were built and destroyed a few times, and that's what you have to say. And therefore the way things went were as follows. They were built in the days of Yeshua ben Nun. They were destroyed and rebuilt in the days of Al Pa'al, and then they were again fell into disrepair, and they were repaired by Asa, king of Yehuda. Now, where do you see that Asa, king of Yehuda, rebuilt these towns? So Rashi here has a bit of difficulty finding the source for it. The Gemara seems to say that it's obvious in the psukim. The pasuk that the Gemara quotes is taken out of the Gemara because that pasuk doesn't exist. Rashi refers to a combination of 2 psukim. One in Divrei Hayam where it says Vayivan Ari Mitzuda Yehuda, that Asa built walled cities in Yehuda. Kishakta Aretz Veinim and Mechalem Bashana Ma'ela Keheniach Hashem Lo. He had peace, and therefore Hashem allowed him to build. And as it says further, this pasuk the Gemara brings Vayomer Yehuda Nivna Esa Arim Ha'ela, that he said to Yehuda, let's rebuild the cities here. Now, our Gemara brings that as a proof that cities existed before, and Asa was rebuilding them. The problem is that these cities that are being referred to here are all in Yehuda, and the towns that we're under discussion now are in Binyamin. So Rashi says you have to refer to the fact that he also rebuilt towns in Binyamin, although it's not mentioned here. He also rebuilt cities in Binyamin. Rashi quotes his own pasuk to support that. It's a psukim later in Divrei Hayamim where it says V'yisu esavni harama v'satzah asher bana Bashav, even Behem is Gava Mitzvah, and Rashi says these are all cities in Binyamin. So you see that Asa did build cities in Binyamin. That must be what Gemara was referring to, that he built these 4 cities as well. Alright, this is all the first halacha said by Rabbi Shua ben Levi. Now we get to the next halacha said by Rabbi Shua ben Levi. And he says that women are chayav to hear the Megillah because they were also included in the miracle. They were also decreed to be destroyed by Haman, and they were saved as well. Therefore they have to hear Megillah as well. Next halacha. What happens when Purim falls on Shabbos? So we know we don't keep a lot of the halachos, we don't read the Megillah then, but Yeshua ben Levi says we do sholin v'dorshin b'inyan shayom. We ask and we answer, we talk about the halachos and the topic of Purim itself on that day. So Gemara says, Why do you need to tell me that? Every Yom Tov, you're supposed to talk about the halachos of that Yom Tov on that day. Like we have a brayso that says that Moshe set up for Klal Yisrael that they should be asking and discussing the halachos and the inyanim of each day upon the day itself. Halachos Pesach on Pesach, halachos Shavuos on Shavuos, halachos Sukkos on Sukkos. Someone says, no, there's an extra chiddush that you do that on Purim as well, and that's because you would have thought on Purim you shouldn't, because as we're going to see later, you don't read the Megillah on Purim because you're afraid you'll end up carrying it. So the Gemara thinks maybe you should make a gzeira and say you shouldn't even discuss Purim at all, so you shouldn't end up carrying the Megillah, and therefore Rabbi Shua ben Levi comes to say that you don't have to be concerned about that, and you should discuss it. The next halacha said by Rabbi Shua ben Levi is the final one. He says that a person has to read the Megillah at night and shnosa bayom. Shnosa. What does shnosa mean? So the Gemara says that the Talmidim first thought that means to learn the mishnayos of it, to be mishanein, to learn about it. Until Rabbi Chia bar Abba came along and he said, no, shnosa here means like mishnah, to repeat, to learn again. So you have to read the Megillah at night and repeat it during the day. So you have to hear the Megillah twice over Purim. So the Gemara says there are psukim that support this. First we have in Tehillim Chaf Vez, which was said by Esther before she went into Achashverosh to ask for the meeting. So she said, Elokai ekra yomam v'lo sa'aneh. Hashem, I called to you at night, you don't answer. V'layla v'lo domieli. And so I called to you during the day, and you don't answer. And at night, and you shouldn't be silent for me. So she was saying, I call to you, meaning Ekra, which could also mean I read both in the day and during the night. So you see, you're supposed to read the Megillah both at night and during the day. The other one is Lamani Zamercha Chavod V'lo Yidom Hashem Elokai Leilam Odeka. So I should sing to you and I should not be quiet. That's two kriyas. And the reading of the Megillah, Rashi explains, is a praise for Kadosh Baruch Hu. It says over the miracle, it's Pirsum Hanis. Alright, these are Rabbi Shua ben Levi's four halachos. The Gemara now gets into why we allow small villages to lay in the Megillah early, as we had seen in our Mishnah. You can go as far back as the 11th of Adar. So the Gemara first says the reason is because the people in the small villages provide food and drink for the large towns and the cities, and therefore we need them to not be keeping Purim on the day that the large cities are keeping Purim, in order that they should be free to supply them with what they need. So the Gemara says that is problematic, because that seems to indicate that the reason the small villages lane early is in order to benefit the big cities. If that's true, then a number of the halachas don't make sense. First of all, how come when Yud Dalet Adar, when Purim falls out on Monday, you don't go back to the previous Thursday and have them lane earlier? Then they're keeping Purim on the same day as the big cities. They won't be available to supply food and drink to them. If the reason that they lane early is in order to supply food and drink, then they should do it even when Purim falls out on Monday. First says, no, that's not a problem. As we've seen in the Psukim, you can't lane earlier than Yud Aleph Adar. If Purim falls on a Monday, you want them to lane the Thursday before. You can't go backwards to the Thursday before, because that would be the 10th of Adar. And they can't lane later because you don't lane later. So Gemara says, alright, I'll change my kasha. When Purim falls on a Thursday, why can't they lane on the preceding Monday? That would be okay. That would only be the 11th of Adar. So Gemara answers, okay, that you don't do, because you don't go from one market day to another market day. Yeah, if they laned on a market day, if they're coming into town on a market day, you're not going to proceed to a different market day. That's not how the Gzera was originally set up. Okay, the Gemara accepts this. The Gemara says, but now I have a solid kasha, and that's why is it true, as we've seen in the Brisa, that in a time or in an area where the people from the small villages don't come to the big city on Mondays and Thursdays, they never travel to the big cities, then they have to lane on Purim itself on Yud Dalet Adar. Then there is no heter for them to go back to the market day, because there is no market day. So Gemara says, according to you, that the reason that they lane earlier is in order to be able to supply the big cities with food and drink. So who cares if there's no market day? We want them to supply the big cities with food and drink. They should lane earlier. Gemara says, you're right. What I meant to say was not that it's in order that they should supply the big cities with food and drink. It's because they supply the big cities with food and drink. Because they do a favor for their brothers who live in the big cities, we give them schar and we make things convenient for them, and we allow them to come in to lane on a day when they're coming in anyway. That's in order to make it more convenient for them. In a place where they're not coming in anyway, so there's no schar, it's not any more convenient. There is no they're coming in anyway. And therefore, they would lay in on Yudalit, and there's no reason for them to lay in earlier. That schar does not exist. Okay, next the Gemara analyzes the phrase in the Mishnah, which says that it lists how it would fall out that the small villages would lay on the 11th, 12th, 13th, or 14th of the month of Adar. So Gemara is bothered by the order of the Mishnah. We began the Mishnah saying that Kriyas Megillah could be on a day 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. That means we went in order of the month. And then when we listed how it comes out, we went in order of the day of the week. We said if Purim falls on a Monday, what happens? If Purim falls on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Shabbos, and a Sunday, what happens? So we should go in the order of the month. If you started off going in the order of the month, we should end off going in the order of the month. So Gemara says, no, the reason we didn't do that is because it would be confusing, because it ends up being backwards in the order of the week. If we were to go in the order of the month, we would say, when does it work out that you lay in the Megillah on the 11th of Adar? That would be if Purim falls on a Sunday. When does it work out that you lay in on the 12th of Adar? That would be if Purim falls on a Shabbos. When does it work out that you lay in on the 13th of Adar? That would be if Purim falls on a Friday. Meaning we're going backwards in the order of the week, and then people get confused and end up with wrong halachas. Therefore, we said let's teach it in order. Let's go in order of the week, and therefore it's easier to keep track of. Okay, now the Gemara gets into what happens when Purim falls on a Friday, and the Gemara is going to say that who is the author of our Mishnah? Our Mishnah could be one of two people. There are two machloksin in which you have the Chachamim or the Tanakama against an individual. One, it's against Rebbe, and one, it's against Rabbi Yossi. The Gemara says our Mishnah fits with Rebbe and Rabbi Yossi in those two machloksin. What are the two machloksin? Two very similar machloksin. Machloksin is what happens to Purim in the big cities without a wall when Yud Al Adar falls on a Friday. So let's remind ourselves, there are three zones as far as Hilchos Purim are concerned. There are the small villages, which they back up to market day. We're not going to be concerned with them in this discussion. And then there are the big cities without a wall, they lay on Yud Al Adar, and then the big cities with a wall, they lay on Tes Vav Adar. That's when they keep Purim, and that's when they lay in the Megillah. So the Gemara says in our Mishnah, it says that when Purim falls on a Friday, so that means that the 15th is a Shabbos, and the cities with a wall then can't lay on that Shabbos. They have to back up, lay on a different day. So the first machlokes, which is between the Tanakama and Rebbe, is what happens to the big cities without a wall. Do they stay on Yudalid? And now you end up with a situation in which the big cities with a wall and without a wall both lay on the same day. That is, the cities without a wall lay on Yudalid because there's nothing wrong, it's Erev Shabbos, that's when they're supposed to. The cities with a wall back up, and they also lay on Yudalid because they can't lay on Shabbos, because you don't lay in the Megillah on Shabbos, as we shall see later. So that's Rebbe's opinion. The Tanakama says no, you back up the cities without a wall as well. They back up to day Yud Gimel. And the reason is because they both learn out of the same pasuk. It says, B'chol shana v'shana. It says, Kimu v'kibla Yehudim aleim v'alzarim v'alkol hanuvim aleim v'lo yavar lios osim v'shana yamim ma'ila kichsavim kizman b'chol shana v'shana. It should be the same every year. And therefore, there should be a similarity between each year. According to Rebbe, the similarity is that Purim, for those that are in unwalled cities, always will be on Yudalid. You don't move it. And therefore, it stays on Yudalid. According to the Tanakama there, no. Purim in the unwalled cities is always the day before Purim in the walled cities, and therefore if the walled cities back up to Yudalid because they can't lay on Tezvav because it's a Shabbos, the unwalled cities will also back up a day and they'll lay on Yud Gimel. They'll back up to Thursday because they always have to be the day before the walled cities. It can't be the same day. Now, why don't they hold of each other? So they each say B'chol Shana V'Shana has to be the same as the other years. So on each one you could ask, well, it's not the same as the other years because it's different. According to Rebbe, in the other years, they're a day apart, and here they're not a day apart. According to the Tanakam, in the other years, the unwalled cities laying on Yudalid, and here they're laying on Yud Gimel. So they both answered, look, what can you do? You can't satisfy both requirements. So this, they each hold is the more important one. Now, our Mishnah, which clearly says that when Yudalid Adar falls on Erev Shabbos, falls on a Friday, the unwalled big cities laying on that Friday clearly holds like Rebbe in this machlokes. Now the other machlokes, which is very similar, is between Rabbi Yossi and a different Tanakama, And that's, what do you do when Purim falls on a Shabbos? What do you do with the walled cities? So this machlokes works out as follows. According to Rabbi Yossi, you leave everything the way it is. Again, just like Rabbi said, and just like our Mishnah said, you have the unwalled cities laying on Yud Daled because it's the right day, even though it's a Friday, and you have the walled cities back up to Yud Daled, so they both laying the same day. However, here the Tanna Kama says, you know what actually happens? The walled cities, instead of landing on Tezvav, and instead of backing up to Yud Daled, they're going to back up all the way to Yud Gimel. Why? Because we don't want the walled cities and the unwalled cities to land the same day. They always have to be a day apart. So the unwalled cities will stay Yud Daled like always, b'chol shana v'shana, and the walled cities will now back up 2 days so that they'll be a day apart, because we always want them to be a day apart, and that's how we achieve that. And again, they both learn from b'shana v'shana. They both say that it's more important that they should have the factor, which we consider to be more important. We'll have to sacrifice the other one. According to Rabbi Yossi, we sacrifice the fact that they'll be a day apart this year in order that the unwalled cities should be on Yud Daled, and the walled cities shouldn't back up 2 days. According to the Tanna Kama, we will sacrifice them being set up that way. That is, that the unwalled cities are always later than the walled cities. We'll sacrifice that the walled cities, I should say, are always later than the unwalled cities. We'll sacrifice that factor, and we'll make the walled cities earlier in order to have them not be the same day. Okay, so our Mishnah either way fits with both Rabbi Yossi in his machlokes and Rebbe in his machlokes, both with their respective Tanna Kama. So now the Gemara has a kasha on Rebbe, is that the way we explained Rebbe here, you will not back up the Purim in the unwalled cities from day 14. The Gemara says it's not true, because you will back it up. What happens when day 14 falls on a Shabbos? Then you back it up all the way to the preceding Thursday. You go back to Yud Beis. So how could Rebbe here say, no, you're not going to move back to Thursday? You see, you do move it back to a Thursday. Gemara says that's not a problem. That's good when you have to move it anyway, because you can't keep Purim in the unwalled cities that year on Yud Daled, because Yud Daled comes out on a Shabbos. So once I'm backing it up, I'll go all the way back to the Thursday, to the Yom HaKnisa. But ordinarily, I wouldn't go back to the Yom HaKnisa. I wouldn't move it if I don't need to move it at all. Now the Gemara quotes the statement of Rabbi Chelbo. The Gemara wants to know who does it fit with. Rabbi Chelbo says that Purim, when it falls on a Shabbos, when Megillah Daf falls on a Shabbos, everybody goes back to the Yom HaKnisa. The Gemara says it can't be everybody. Not everybody has to go back to Thursday. The Mukafin, the walled cities, could lay in on Sunday, just like they always do. They lay in on the 15th of Adar. It falls on a Sunday that year. So Gemara says no, it means that everybody else falls back to the Yom HaKnisa, the unwalled cities and the small villages go back to the Yom HaKnisa, and that fits with Rebbe again, like we said, like we just quoted, that you go back to the Yom HaKnisa when Purim Yud Daled falls on a Shabbos. Alright, now the Gemara says, what we see from here, though, is that everybody agrees that you cannot read the Megillah on a Shabbos. The Gemara says, what's the reason for that? The Gemara gives two reasons. One is the famous one, Gzeira of Rabbah. Everybody reads the Megillah, not everybody knows the halachos. We're afraid people are going to carry it to show it to a chacham or ask a question to learn how to lane, and therefore they'll come to carry on Shabbos. We don't want that to happen, so we canceled Megillah laning when Purim falls on a Shabbos. Now the Gemara gives another reason here, and that is because the Aniyim who receive Matanos Avyonim, they are all looking towards the Megillah. They are expecting to receive those gifts and that charity when the Megillah is read, and therefore whenever the Megillah is read, we have to give Matanos Avyonim. Since we can't give Matanos Avyonim, which is money and is muktzah, since we can't do that on Shabbos, we're not going to read Megillah on Shabbos in order not to disappoint the poor people who expect to get gifts when the Megillah is read. Then the Gemara says support for this concept that Megillah and Matanos Avyonim always have to be the same day comes from another Brisa, which we've seen, that says that even though we said that the small villages go back to the day of the market, they collect Matanos Avyonim and give it out on that day, because it's the day of the Megillah readings. One says you don't mean to say even though, you mean to say because Megillah reading goes back, therefore the day of Matanos Avyonim also goes back to the market day, because the Aniyim are expecting it on that day. However, the Suda of Purim and the Simcha, that will stay on its regular day. That will not move because that is independent of Megillah reading. That'll be on its right day on Yud Dalet.